Welcome, young adventurers. My name is KnightmareAlpha, and this is Pathfinder Archive, the archive that tells you everything about the Pathfinder adventure role-playing game. And today we're going to talk about one of the most basic classes there is, the easiest to learn and often the hardest to master, and also often overlooked, thanks to its more simpler mechanics and therefore, let's say, moderate power level. It's still a great class. What I'm talking about is the fighter, the expert of all kinds of combat. Thanks to this expertise, this is a highly specialized class, and many people might be overwhelmed by the options that they are granted, but I can assure you that this might be one of the best options you have. And also it's the simplest class in the game, so you probably should start here if you want to go somewhere. Let's start with a standard of it all. The fighter is a full attack bonus character class that goes for 20 levels. This means that he will be very good at hitting things no matter what you do. And this is definitely one of the bigger things that you have with a class. It also comes with the 10-sided dice as the hit dice, meaning that you will have on average a pretty good amount of HP to spare, so you can take a lot of damage if necessary. They are not really good at skills, they only have a very small amount of skill ranks, 2 plus intelligence modifier, so that makes, depending on what you play, maybe 4, maybe 5 ranks at best of skills. And they're also not trained in many good skills. They have climb, handle animal, intimidate, knowledge engineering, the all profession and craft skills, ride, survival, and of course swim. Usually you should pick maybe 2, maybe 3 of these skills to make them work. In my opinion, it's always good to have a knowledge skill. It's always good to know where you want to go. So if you want to deal, for example, with animals, for example, for combat purposes, like having a guard dog or the likes, or also for purposes for riding and mounting combat, you might want to invest in a horse if that's the kind of style of combat you want to have. But otherwise, you are mostly free to pursue what you want, but you will be definitely better at manual actions like climbing and swimming, and maybe a bit of survival, depending on what you want to go with a character. It's up to you. And continuing this trend of freedom of choice, fighters are trained with all simple and martial weapons the like. They're also trained in all kinds of armor, all kinds of shields, including tower shields, and that gives them quite a large amount of weapons to choose, from basic ranged options and close options for the hand-to-hand combat, over more complex options. Of course, exotic weapons are not included in that, so if you are interested in playing a very specialized fighter, maybe take a look in certain exotic weapon feats that you might want. It's always all important to plan ahead a little bit with your character, so make sure that you know what you want to specialize in. Do you want to go for one weapon alone, or do you want to go for multiple weapons? You will be able to specialize in certain kinds of weapons over the progression of a character, so don't be afraid to take a certain pick early, because you might regret it later on. Keeping in tone with that kind of specialization, the most important class feature that the fighter will gain over time is the bonus feat. Basically, every other level you will be able to pick a certain combat feat from a list of combat feats, basically all combat feats in the game. And believe me, there are a, excuse my French, shit ton of feats. This means you will have always to check these out. It's similar to how spellcasters have to study spells, you have to study feats. But there are some baselines that we will go over at the build phase of this character analysis. The other feature that you will get early is bravery. Bravery allows the fighter to have higher will bonuses against fear effects. That does not come up so much, but it will be a quite important element later on, so you might not want to skip on that. Next in line is the armor training. This is a simple but effective feat. This reduces the armor penalty for wearing an armor over time, and it will also increase the maximum dexterity that you can use while in this armor for defensive purposes. So this is one of these things that scales rather well and allows you to become more adept than any other class in the game with armor. So protection will be always provided, so don't forget your armor. This will also allow you to move at normal speed over level progression, meaning that you will move faster in armor than any other class. So again, don't skip on your armor. After that, at level 5, you will be able to get weapon training. This means that you have to pick a certain kind of weapon group, like blades or claws or crossbows, that you will gain certain bonuses. These bonuses will increase rather rapidly, making you really good at the certain kind of weapon. And that's basically it until you reach level 19. The important thing is that all of these things are recurring elements. You will get more bonus feats over time, your armor training will improve, you will gain more weapons to choose weapon training with, and this will continue on, as I said. At level 19, the fighter then gains Armor Mastery. This grants the fighter a damage reduction of 5 as long as they wear an armor and/or shield. This is quite a good defensive option, but it comes rather late in the game, so at this point it's not that effective anymore, but any defensive option you can grab hold of is definitely a good one. And then, finally, at level 20, you gain Weapon Mastery. This allows you to pick one certain kind of weapon, for example a longsword, in fact the longsword is even listed in the book, and any attack you make with that weapon automatically confirm all critical threats and have their damage multiplier increased by 1. This means that weapons with high critical hit modifiers will be incredibly more powerful. You also cannot be disarmed with that certain kind of weapon anymore. So this should be the moment where you pick your absolute signature weapon and apply it. It's a grand ability and it makes you quite powerful at this point. So choose wisely. Sadly, this comes so late in the game that it rather does not actually come into play. So you take what you can get. After all, level 20 abilities should be quite powerful, and it is quite powerful. So yeah, and that's all she wrote. This is basically the whole ability set of the classes. Of course, you gain your typical defensive saves, like the very good fortitude save, but that's mostly all. There's not much more to this class, and yet, still there is more to this class in quite an impressive way. The fact that you have access to quite literal thousands of feats means that you can highly specialize your combat style. You have to understand that Pathfinder has, over its whole running time, basically drowned us in combat feats. And you can pick every one of these as long as you get the other prerequisite of the feat, you know? This means that at every level you have a new feat. The first level gives you a feat, the second level gives you a feat, the third level gives you a feat. There are so many feats, it's impressive. So if you like feats, that's definitely where you should go. So what feats do you recommend, you might ask? And the answer is all of them? Well, not all of them, of course, but there's so many it's hard to find a certain way. But of course there have been some fighting styles crystallized over the years that are quite popular. The first one is the classic power attack style. This means that you use the power attack feat to deal massive amounts of damage with one certain weapon. Combined with feats like Vital Strike that allow you to make very, very powerful damaging attacks, you will be able to quite impressively deal a lot of damage. But you should be knowing one thing. Fighters are not the best when it comes to baseline damage. You should therefore always realize that defensive options and options to control the combat might be sometimes better. So think of investing in another alternative strategy, like, for example, using combat maneuvers like disarm, trip, or the more advanced ones like drag, to use this to your advantage. This grants you more flexibility and will make a very important element of the combat. Your group also sometimes might want to use things like grabbing, but that's probably not your specialty. Leave that up to the monks, they are really good at that. So yeah, no wrestling for fighters, who would have thought? You're better with weapons anyway. You can also go for a ranged build. Ranged weapons are not as powerful outside of a crossbows though, so you might want to look up what you want to go for. There are many feat chains that you can take. But if you really want to go for raw potential of damage and attacks, well, why not choose Death by a Million Cuts with the 2-weapon fighting style? This allows you to use more than one weapon. The only downside to it that I have seen is that you need a higher dexterity than normal to actually produce any kinds of results, so you have to be careful about that. So, and of course, what are your favorite stats that you should use? Because, hey, we're talking about that right now, so why not go into that? So, attributes are important for a fighter, especially when you want to build a very competent one. A power attack fighter, for example, will favor strength and constitution over basically everything else. Be reckless, why not? Other characters, like for example the 2-weapon fighting specialist, needs a higher dexterity, so you need to prioritize that. On the flip side, you can use that to increase your defensive stats, so you probably don't get that hit that often, outside of maybe getting hit by spells. There are also other kinds of more specialized combat, like the mounted combat, that can do incredible damage, but you have to take care about the fact that you have a horse with you at all times, and some dungeons don't allow that much. So you might want to pick something a little bit more palatable. Then there are very weird specialist things like being a dirty fighter or other more exotic kinds of fighters, specializing on one certain weapon to the utmost extreme. And of course, there is something that I have to explain. Fighters were a little bit more useful back in the day in the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. For those who are uninitiated, Pathfinder is technically an update on the old Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 rule set. I know this doesn't make the game more popular, or maybe that is the reason why it is so popular, but in the eyes of some people that's a detriment, and in the eyes of some people it's an upside, you know? And because of that, there had been many weird mechanics, and they have all been fixed mostly. Some feats had powerful loopholes you could use, like for example Cleave and Great Cleave. This allowed you basically to have unlimited attacks if you set this up correctly, and Pathfinder fixed that for balancing issues. Because of that, you cannot combine all mechanics with each other, but there are still some really useful feats that you want. If you want to go for a quite amazing build, try go for a Whirlwind Attack Fighter. The ability to attack everything around you might come in handy, and can easily be picked up, especially by fighters with a more defensive edge for mobility. This is pretty good. Finally, what kind of equipment do you want to have? Well, you're the fighter, so you should pick up an armor, and probably a shield, and maybe a weapon. Oh, by the way, weapon and shield combat is also a thing, so if you want, you can go with that. Shield bashes can be pretty powerful. I just forgot it in the previous section and just added it here. But what's the rest of your equipment? Well, besides that, you should not only have the focus weapon with you, but also a sidearm. Basically, if you're a melee fighter, you should have a backup ranged option. In fact, I recommend to all players having always a backup weapon for the thing that they don't specialize in. So even though you might be a ranged rogue, don't forget to pick up a knife. It might save your life in some situations. It's very helpful also. But the fighter is the specialist when it comes to dungeoneering and exploration. Well, not the most good at these, but the fact is, fighters are strong and carry around a lot of stuff, so you might want to have some useful tools for the adventuring lifestyle. Sure, the rogue can also have some of these tools, but you would be surprised. If you want to fill an interesting role in your party, maybe decide to become the local cook. This can quite improve your friendship with other people and often gives you interesting options. It should not be a whole character, I might say, even though this could be crazily funny, like that you are hunting down ingredients and therefore became an adventurer. Can be an interesting character hook. Don't recommend it all the time, but it's pretty good. But this will make you popular, and this might be helpful for your party in other certain situations, like if you have to prepare a banquet or something like that. So pick up a cooking kit maybe. Otherwise, some spare rations could be helpful, and maybe some tools to help you out, like, just things that you don't expect from somebody. And don't forget to include some items for your personality. I always have some interesting quirks for my characters, so this might be interesting just for the role-playing aspect. And that's basically all. I don't want to get into details of archetypes because that's a whole different thing and very convoluted, so I'm going to talk about that another time. And now you know every basic thing that is to know about the fighter. And you should use this knowledge to create characters and go on adventures. But maybe the fighter is not your type. Maybe you're more stealthily, and maybe you just want to go for massive damage. If that's the case, then I recommend coming up next time, then we're going to talk about the second most rudimentary class, the Rogue. Until then, I'm KnightmareAlpha, and always remember, the spirit of adventure is forever. See you next time. Hey there, you just finished the latest episode of Pathfinder Archive. I hope you had fun. If you want to tell me that you had fun, you can use the comment section and tell me what you liked and what you didn't like, and make recommendations of what I should do next, and leave questions if you have them, because I'm pretty sure I left you with a lot of questions. If you're a little bit shy, you can use the like button. That is also useful. And if you want to keep up with Pathfinder Archives and all the other stupid shit I'm going to do, then just click the subscribe button. And maybe the notification bell, but I'm not going to force you to do that. If you want to support the channel, there is a potential donation link in the description that you can use. You can also follow me on Twitter, and regret that probably because I'm not that kind of active on Twitter anymore. And I have a Discord link if you want to more directly interact with me. So go ahead. I see you, hopefully next time. Bye.